Charlotte, North Carolina, October 14th, 7:42 p.m. A woman sits alone at a table set for six, watching the ice melt in untouched water glasses. My name is Barbara Chapman, and I am surrounded by empty chairs. The steakhouse hums with the warmth of other families, but my table is a silent island. I am waiting for the parents I bailed out and the brother whose rent I just paid with my savings. But when my phone finally buzzes, the message isn't an apology. It is a declaration of war. They didn't just stand me up. They used my own money to celebrate the son they actually wanted. Tonight, I stop being the victim. Tonight, I start keeping score. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The fork in front of me caught the overhead light gleaming with a sharp, sterile brightness that seemed to mock the empty chairs surrounding it. I was sitting at a round table meant for six in the center of a mid-range steakhouse in Charlotte, the kind of place where families go to celebrate graduations and anniversaries, where the hum of conversation is a thick, warm blanket. But at my table, the silence was heavy enough to choke on. I checked my phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. It was 7:42 p.m. Dinner was supposed to be at 7. My parents Richard and Linda and my younger brother Jason were perpetually running on what they called Chapman time, a charming euphemism for a lack of respect for anyone else's schedule. But usually they at least texted by now. I shifted in my seat, the strap of my heels digging into my ankle. I hated these shoes. I had bought them on clearance because I hadn't bought myself new clothes in 6 months. I had been saving for a down payment on a new car. My 10-year-old sedan was rattling like a dying lung, but then Jason had called me 3 weeks ago. He had a vision, he said. A soft launch for his consulting brand. He just needed a little capital to get the website live. So the car money went to Jason, and I was sitting here in clearance rack heels staring at a menu I had already memorized, telling myself that this year would be different. They had promised. Dad had said, "We're going to do it right, Barbie, Big 29. Then my phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. The sound was like a gunshot in the vacuum of my anxiety. It was a group text. The sender was Dad, but the phrasing sounded like a committee decision. "We're not coming. Jason needs us right now. You're not our priority tonight. Enjoy your dinner." I read it twice. The words swam in front of my eyes, rearranging themselves but refusing to soften. You're not our priority. They could have said they were stuck in traffic. They could have lied and said Mom had a migraine. They could have just forgotten me. God knows I was used to being the background noise in the Jason Chapman show. But they didn't forget. They remembered me enough to tell me explicitly that I didn't matter. It wasn't an oversight. It was a demotion. I felt the heat rise up my neck, a mix of humiliation and a sudden sharp clarity. They weren't just absent, they were dismissing me. Before I could process the cruelty of the text, a server appeared at my elbow. She looked young, maybe college-aged, and she held a glossy gift bag with a hesitant expression. "Ma'am, a gentleman dropped this off at the host stand about an hour ago. He said it was for the birthday girl at table 12. My heart gave a pathetic little jump. Maybe this was part of a surprise. I took the bag. It felt light. I reached inside and pulled out a beige cardigan. It was soft cashmere blend, decent quality. I held it up and a wave of nausea hit me so hard, I almost dropped it. I knew this sweater. I knew the exact texture of the weave. I had bought this exact cardigan for my mother last Mother's Day. I flipped the tag over. There, in faint blue ink that had mostly been scrubbed out but was still visible under the restaurant's aggressive lighting, was my own handwriting, "Love you, Mom." They hadn't just stood me up. They had re-gifted a present I had given them to get out of buying me something new. It was a loop of erasure. They didn't just forget me. They reused me. They rewrapped my own effort and handed it back to me as an afterthought. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of there before I started screaming or crying, and I wasn't sure which one would come first. But my hands were shaking, and my thumb hovered over the Instagram icon on my phone. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was emotional self-harm. But I needed to know where Jason needs us actually meant. I opened the app. It was right there at the top of the feed posted 4 minutes ago. The location tag was a rooftop bar across town, the kind with $20 cocktails and a dress code. The photo was a selfie taken by Jason. He was grinning that $1 million Chapman smile that had gotten him out of every speeding ticket and failed class in his life. Behind him, Mom and Dad were raising champagne flutes, beaming with a pride I had never ever seen directed at me. The caption read, "Couldn't have done it without my rock." My parents threw me a surprise promotion party. #family first, #blessed. I zoomed in on the photo. I didn't look at their faces. I looked at Jason's wrist. Glinting in the flash of the camera was a heavy silver watch with a navy blue face. It was a Tag Heuer. I knew the model because Jason had texted me a screenshot of it 2 months ago with the message, "Too expensive, but a guy can dream, right?" My chest tightened, squeezing the air out of my lungs. Last week, Jason had called me in a panic. He said his rent was overdue, that his landlord was threatening eviction, that he was scared of being kicked out on the street. He had sounded so desperate. I had wired him $1,500 money I had scraped together from overtime shifts. I opened my banking app right there under the table, hiding the screen as if the server could see my shame. I scrolled to the transfer from last Tuesday. I had labeled it "Rent Help. Don't tell Dad." The math hit me with the force of a physical blow. The $1,500 wasn't for rent. It was for the party. It was for the watch. I had funded the celebration of the son they actually wanted. I had paid for the champagne they were toasting him with, while I sat alone with a recycled sweater. I didn't cry. The tears that had been threatening to spill evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I pulled 2 $20 bills from my wallet and threw them on the table next to the untouched silverware. I walked out of the restaurant, the humidity of the North Carolina night hitting me like a wet towel. I got into my rattling sedan, kicked off the heels, and drove home in silence. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at my kitchen counter and opened my laptop. I created a new document. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, then I typed the title in all caps, "Ways I Paid to Be Erased." I looked at the words. I had accidentally typed a space in the last word, so it looked like Iris ED. I backspaced and fixed it, but the image stayed in my mind. Eris Ed, past tense. I typed the first line. 1. Jason's rent, $1,500. Actually a promotion party and watch. I was about to type the second item, the tuition gap I covered 3 years ago, when my phone buzzed again. Another notification. This one was from the family group chat. Family emergency Zoom. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Be there. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. Emergency. They ignored my birthday, stole my money, and mocked me on social media, but now there was an emergency. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my throat. Funny. I didn't know I still counted as family. The next evening at 8:00 p.m. sharp, I clicked the Zoom link, my stomach churning with a mixture of dread and a foolish, lingering hope that an apology was coming. I was wrong. The screen flickered to life, and instantly my father's face dominated the frame. Richard "Rick" Chapman sat in his leather armchair, the very image of a small-town patriarch, radiating that specific brand of confidence that comes from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. Mom was a nervous blur over his left shoulder, and Jason occupied his own square, looking vaguely bored. Dad didn't even say hello. He launched straight into a monologue about legacy, his voice booming through my laptop speakers as if he were addressing a shareholder meeting rather than his children. He spoke of Jason's promotion as if it were a moon landing, our future, he called him, our investment, our pride. He barely looked at the camera, barely acknowledged the square of pixels that contained me. Now, Dad said, leaning in, Jason's new position requires a certain liquidity to maintain the image we need to restructure some finances. We're looking at a bridge loan just to tide things over until his bonus kicks in. We need a family front on this. Barbara, we need you as a co-signer. I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. 24 hours ago, they had told me I wasn't a priority. Now they needed my credit score. The silence stretched, and for the first time in 29 years, I didn't rush to fill it with compliance. "What about my birthday?" I asked. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "I feel like you used me. I paid for that party with the money I sent Jason for rent. You didn't show up for me. You ambushed me with that text." The air in the virtual room changed. Jason looked down at his phone. Mom fidgeted, but Dad just narrowed his eyes, his expression shifting from orator to disciplinarian. "Don't be dramatic, Barbara," he snapped. "You always make everything about you. You should be proud you were in a position to help your brother. That is what family is. Jason has a work ethic that requires support. He's out there building an empire, not sitting behind a desk doing some soft marketing job." The insult landed with precision. My career, the one that paid my bills and bailed them out repeatedly, was soft. Jason's delusions of grandeur were work. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my laptop, the screen illuminating the dark living room, and I returned to my document, ways I paid to be erased. I stopped crying and started calculating. I opened a spreadsheet and began entering data going back years. Row 4. Jason's college tuition gap, $4,000 paid directly to the bursar so he could graduate. Row 5. Mom and Dad's medical deductible when Dad let the insurance lapse, $2,500. Row 6. Temporary mortgage payments on the family home 3 years ago, totaling $6,000 under the verbal promise that I was building equity in the estate. I created a new tab at the bottom and labeled it Emotional Overdrafts. Here I listed the non-financial costs, the vacations I skipped to dog sit their unruly labs, the dates I canceled because Mom was lonely, the therapy bills. I realized with a sick clarity that I had sacrificed my own adulthood trying to be the dependable daughter, buying shares in a company that was actively trying to fire me. 3 days later, the betrayal moved from emotional to legal. I was at my desk at work when the mail cart came by. A letter landed in my tray from a mortgage servicing company. It was addressed to Richard and Jason Chapman. I frowned. Why was this sent to my office address? Dad sometimes used my work address for packages to avoid porch pirates, but this was official correspondence. Confused, I logged onto the county property records website. My heart hammered against my ribs as I searched for the Chapman family home, the house I had poured thousands into, the house I was told I had a stake in. The record loaded. I scanned the owner history. There was a new entry dated 2 weeks ago. Quit claim deed. Grantor Barbara Chapman. Grantees Richard Chapman. Jason Chapman. I clicked the PDF attachment. On the screen appeared a document authorizing the removal of my name from the title. At the bottom was a signature, Barbara Chapman. It was a decent forgery, a little too looped on the B, but close enough to pass a tired clerk. The room spun. They weren't just ignoring me. They were trying to legally erase me. I left work immediately. I drove 40 minutes to the suburbs, turning onto the street where I had learned to ride a bike. The house looked idyllic, the American flag flapping on the porch, Dad's pickup in the driveway. I walked in without knocking. The living room was a shrine to Jason, trophies on the mantle, his graduation photo center stage. I was nowhere. I found Dad in the kitchen. I slammed the printout of the deed onto the granite island. "I never signed this," I said, my voice shaking with rage. Dad didn't flinch. He glanced at the paper, then back at his coffee, offering a terrifyingly casual shrug. "Your brother needs security, Barbara. He's the one carrying the family name. You're single, no kids. You don't need a house like this. We're just being practical." He took a sip, looking me dead in the eye. "Don't threaten this family over paperwork. You'll be taken care of as long as you behave. Don't make me regret trusting you." I turned and walked out. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat in the silence. My hands were trembling, but my mind was strangely, icily clear. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Mom. I didn't text Jason. I opened Google and typed real estate fraud attorney near me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking my parents for permission. I was asking a lawyer how to hold them accountable. I sat across from attorney Monica Reyes in an office that smelled of lemon polish and expensive coffee. She was mid-40s with a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to have seen every possible variation of human greed. On the mahogany desk between us lay my life in paper form, the spreadsheet of transfers, the screenshots of guilt-tripping texts, and the damning copy of the forged deed. Monica didn't gasp or shake her head. She just turned the pages with a quiet, lethal precision. "This is textbook financial exploitation, Barbara," she said, her voice low and steady. "And the deed, that's a felony. Forgery, fraud, filing false documents." She leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin. "We have enough to file a civil suit immediately, but given his standing in the community, he might try to bury this claim. It's a family misunderstanding. We need to make it impossible for him to hide." She suggested a strategy that made my stomach turn over. We wouldn't serve him at home. We wouldn't send a letter he could tear up. We would do it when he was most vulnerable, when he was pretending to be a saint. The upcoming Small Business Leaders Who Give Back fundraiser. It was the perfect stage. I hesitated. These were my parents. The biological imperative to protect them even as they cannibalized me was strong. But then I looked at the spreadsheet again. I looked at the rent payment that became a watch. "Okay," I said. "I didn't come to burn the town down, Monica. I just came to stop them from burning me alive." The night of the fundraiser, the local civic center was draped in red, white, and blue. Banners proclaimed integrity, family values, and community first. I stood in the back of the banquet hall, hidden in the shadow of a pillar. My father was on stage wearing a blazer that cost more than my car, with Jason standing dutifully at his side and Mom beaming in the front row. Dad held the microphone like a scepter. "Success isn't just about profit," he boomed, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "It's about legacy. It's about passing the torch." He clapped a hand on Jason's shoulder. "My son Jason is my right-hand man. He is proof that sacrifice pays off. He is the future of Chapman Enterprises." He paused for applause, basking in it. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "And we have our daughter Barbara too, our artsy girl. She's still figuring things out, taking the scenic route, but we love her anyway." A ripple of polite, pitying laughter moved through the room. I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, feeling years of humiliation compressing into a single diamond-hard point of rage. Artsy girl, figuring things out. I was the only one in the family who had paid their own bills for a decade. As the applause died down and the crowd moved toward the buffet, I intercepted them. I asked Dad, Mom, and Jason to step into a small administrative side room for a quick family photo. They followed Dad, looking annoyed at the interruption, Jason checking his watch, the watch I paid for. The room was stark lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes and smelling of stale office coffee. As soon as the door clicked shut, the air left the room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it, but my hands were steady as I laid the folder on the cheap folding table. "We need to talk," I said. "Make it quick, Barbara," Dad said, checking his reflection in a window. "People are waiting." "I know," I said. "That's why I brought these." I fanned out the documents, the forged deed, the bank transfers, the texts where he called me dramatic while asking for cash. "You didn't just forget my birthday. You ambushed me. You used me to fund Jason's lifestyle, and then you tried to erase me on paper." Dad's face shifted instantly. The benevolent community leader vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating bully I knew at home. He didn't look at the papers. He looked at me with pure disdain. "You are misunderstanding everything," he sneered. "A real daughter would be grateful to support her brother. You're being ungrateful. You're acting crazy. If you try to make a scene out of this, you will have no family left. I will cut you off so completely you won't even exist to us." Mom stepped forward, clutching her pearls. "Barbara, please, think of Jason's future. Don't ruin this night." Jason stood against the wall, silent, looking everywhere but at me. He didn't deny the forgery. He just waited for Dad to fix it. "I'm not the one ruining things," I said, my voice rising. You've spent my entire life praising him and grinding me down. You threaten me with abandonment like I haven't already lived it for 20 years. That's enough, Dad shouted, stepping toward me. You listen to me. There was a sharp knock on the door. Before Dad could finish his threat, it opened. Monica Reyes stepped in, flanked by the chairman of the fundraiser board and the city attorney. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Chapman, Ms. Chapman, Monica said, her voice calm and professional. My client has provided us with allegations of deed forgery and financial misrepresentation involving your properties. Given the nature of these documents and the board's strict ethics bylaws, we need to ask you a few questions immediately. Dad froze. He looked at the city attorney, then at the board chairman he had been laughing with 10 minutes ago. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a shock that was slowly turning into hatred. He glared at me like I had betrayed the entire bloodline, like I was the villain. But I didn't flinch. I held his gaze. For once his praise couldn't save him. Not from the truth, not from the law, and certainly not from me. The fallout was immediate, spreading through our town like a gasoline fire. By the next morning, the local business journal had run a short, devastating blurb. Local developer under investigation for property irregularities. It didn't explicitly name the forgery, but in a town this size, the gaps were filled in by gossip before the ink was dry. The community I had grown up in split down the middle. At the grocery store, longtime neighbors who had known me since kindergarten suddenly found the contents of their shopping carts fascinating when I walked down the aisle whispering that I had turned on my own blood. But there were people I barely knew. The receptionist at the dentist, the guy who ran the car wash, who caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod or sent quiet Facebook messages saying, "We always saw how they treated you. Good for you." My family, however, went nuclear. My phone became a repository for their rage. Mom left weeping voicemails, her voice cracking as she asked, "How could you do this to us? You'll regret this when we're gone." Jason took to social media, posting vague black background stories with quotes about snakes in the grass and loyalty being a rare currency, never mentioning that his loyalty came with a price tag I was paying. Dad called me a traitor in a text message so vitriolic I had to screenshot it just to believe it was real. A week later, I was back in Monica's office. The air was tense. Dad's lawyer had reached out. "They want to settle," Monica said, sliding a document across the desk. "They're offering a full buyout of your equity share in the house plus damages." She paused. "But there's a catch." I flipped to the last page. An NDA. A non-disclosure agreement so tight it would legally bind me from ever speaking about the forgery, the loans, or the rent money again. If I signed, I'd get a check large enough to pay off my student loans and move to a different state. I could start fresh. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. I could just take the money and run. But then I heard my father's voice in my head, the same tone he used in the kitchen. "Behave, and we'll take care of you." This money wasn't an apology. It was hush money. It was a fee to purchase my silence and restore their facade. I pushed the paper back. "No," I said, my voice surprising me with its strength. "I'm done being paid to disappear. I won't sign it." I let the legal battle proceed to the next step, and in the meantime, I began to build a life that actually belonged to me. I started accepting invitations I would have previously declined to be on standby for my parents. I went to a Sunday potluck at my coworker Maya's house where nobody asked me for a loan or critiqued my career. I met a neighbor, Eli, a quiet guy who saw me struggling to change a wiper blade in the parking lot. He didn't push me aside to do it for me. He just handed me a tool and showed me the latch mechanism, treating me with a casual respect that felt foreign. I started therapy, learning the vocabulary for what I had survived: enmeshment, financial abuse, scapegoating. As I got stronger, the family's attempts to drag me back escalated. Jason finally called me directly. He didn't ask how I was. He was furious. "My promotion is on hold because of this investigation," he shouted. "HR is asking questions about my finances. You're being vindictive, Barbara. You're ruining my life over a piece of paper." I gripped the phone, feeling the old reflex to apologize to fix it for him. But I killed that reflex. I sacrificed my peace for your comfort for years, Jason, I said calmly. I won't do it anymore. I hung up before he could reply. The resolution when it came wasn't a dramatic courtroom showdown with gavel bangs and weeping confessions. It was a sterile mediation hearing in a conference room. A forensic document examiner confirmed the signature on the deed was a forgery. My bank statements proved the financial trail. Faced with the undeniable evidence and my refusal to sign the NDA, Dad's legal team folded. He was forced to restore my name to the deed so we could sell the property properly, and he had to pay restitution for the funds I had loaned. It was a quiet, bureaucratic victory, but it felt like breathing oxygen after holding my breath for 29 years. I walked out of the courthouse feeling light, but as I reached my car, a shadow fell over the driver's side door. It was Dad. He looked older, smaller, his face pinched with a malice I no longer feared. He didn't shout. He hissed, leaning in close. You think you've won. You haven't won anything. You've lost your family. You'll regret this when you're alone and we are all you have left. I stepped back, opening my car door. My heart pounded, but my hands didn't shake. I looked him in the eye. You've been trying to erase me my whole life, Dad, I said. I'm just done handing you the pen. I got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. 8 months after I walked away from my father in that parking lot, I turned a key in a lock that belonged to no one but me. It was a small bungalow on the east side of town with peeling blue paint and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. But the deed filed at the county clerk's office had exactly one name on it: Barbara Chapman. There were no co-signers, no silent partners, and no strings attached. The silence inside the house wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind I had grown up with, the kind that preceded a storm. It was a spacious, airy silence. It was the sound of peace. I spent the first few weeks filling the space with things that made no sense to anyone but me. In the dining nook, I placed a round wooden table I found at an estate sale. Surrounding it were 4 chairs that didn't match, one velvet, one wicker, 2 painted bright yellow. They were a declaration of independence. For years I had tried to fit into the rigid aesthetic of my parents' lives, where appearance was everything and reality was nothing. Now my walls were covered with photos of the people who actually showed up for me. There was a candid shot of Maya laughing at a potluck, a picture of the volunteer team I worked with on weekends, and a selfie of me solo hiking a trail I used to be told was too dangerous for a girl to tackle alone. There were no staged family portraits. The spaces where my parents and brother would have been were filled with light. My mornings had changed too. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee watching the neighborhood wake up, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't flinch when my phone buzzed. The Pavlovian response to the notification sounded the spike of cortisol. The immediate assumption that I had done something wrong, or owed someone money, was fading. I got updates through Monica occasionally, though I rarely asked for them. I knew that Dad had paid a significant fine and quietly stepped down from the leadership of the business association to avoid a public ethics inquiry. He was semi-retired, now a forced retreat into the shadows. Jason had moved to Atlanta, apparently telling anyone who would listen that he had been backstabbed by a vindictive sister who stole his inheritance. I didn't feel the need to correct the record. I realized that my revenge wasn't about ruining them. It was simply refusing to let them ruin me anymore. In the evenings, I opened my laptop, but not to update a spreadsheet of debts. I had started a blog titled What I Owe Myself. It was anonymous, but the stories were raw and real. I wrote about the rent money that became a watch. I wrote about the forged deed. I wrote about the emotional overdrafts of being the child who is only loved when she is useful. The comments section became a community of its own. Strangers from across the country wrote in saying, "This is my story too," or "I thought I was the only one." I realized then that my betrayal wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was part of a larger silent pattern that so many women live through, breaking themselves to keep a family whole that would never return the favor. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box from my old apartment, I found it. Tucked at the bottom of a drawer beneath a stack of tax returns was a photograph. It was old, the colors fading to sepia. I was 7 years old, sitting on my father's shoulders at the county fair. He looked strong and happy like the hero I believed he was, and I looked down at him with pure, unadulterated adoration. I held the photo for a long time. My thumb brushed over his face. I didn't frame it, but I didn't shred it either. I tucked it into a keepsake box and put it on a high shelf. I wasn't pretending those moments didn't exist. I was just refusing to let them excuse what came after. That little girl deserved a father who protected her, not one who preyed on her. Keeping the photo was my way of honoring her, not him. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Eli. He stood on the leaning porch with 2 tickets to a concert at the local fairgrounds, a folk band we both liked. "No pressure," he said, shifting his weight. "Just thought you might like to get out." I looked at him, kind, consistent, and asking for nothing I hadn't offered. I felt safe. "I'd love to," I said. But as I grabbed my jacket, I noted the feeling in my chest. I wasn't going because I needed him to fix my life. My story didn't end happily because a man showed up. It ended happily because I had finally showed up for myself. Before we left, I went back to the kitchen. I set 2 plates at my mismatched table, one for me, one for a friend coming over for breakfast the next day. I looked at the scene, the food I bought, the table I chose, the house I owned. They had tried to erase me from their story. They tried to edit me down to a signature on a deed and a bank transfer. So I wrote my own story. I looked at the empty chair opposite mine. I wasn't begging for a seat anymore. I was building the table. Sometimes the most American thing you can do isn't to stand by your family no matter what. It's to stand up, walk away, and claim the freedom they always told you didn't deserve. Barbara finally found her peace, proving that sometimes walking away is the strongest move you can make. If you enjoyed this story of reclaiming one's life, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.